Hi Guy, welcome to the AMIGArama podcast. I'm your host Lorfarius, and for this week we're going to be covering Nitro. But as always, before we get onto the game, let's have a look at some of the Amiga news this week, and there's quite a few things been going on actually. The first I noticed was a game called Golden Wing, which was apparently a winner of a game competition at something called the Capacitor Party in late 2017. I think there's like a demo or homebrew style coding party where people get together and come up with different ideas for games and stuff. It was a really good idea, but from what I'd seen of it, and then they finished it off, put some music, tightened it up a bit, done extras with the controls and stuff, and now it's out now in full ADF format. I'll post a link into the show notes as usual. But it's actually worth downloading. You can get it in ADF format or play it in an emulator if you're going to. But it's like a single screen shooter, a bit like Asteroids in a way, but without the momentum. It's got some really thumping great music going through it. It's even got some voices in there. And then I'm really impressed with it to say, it's like a homebrew coded game. Back in the day, this had probably been like a proper professional title that would have come out. So yeah, most impressed. And I've played it, so it's well worth picking up. Next up, I noticed that Sensible Software, the complete Amiga works, has been released by CD32 Covers. That's .blogspot.co.uk. I'll put the full link again in the notes. Basically, these are the chaps behind lots of these Amiga CD32 compilations for all different studio houses, but with this one, it's basically all the Sensible Software games across the entire history of the Amiga, and there's a lot on this. You've got things like Cannon Fodder CD32, Cannon Fodder 2, you will need a mouse with that, so if you've got a CD32, you're going to have to consider it. But most of the games do actually work with a joystick, so at least you've got that element of it. Megalomania, Sensible Golf, all the Sensible Soccers, right from the original European Champions, different patch versions, up till Sensible World of Soccer 96, 97, WizKid, the story of Whizball 2, and there's a load of the shoot 'em up construction kit demo games that have been included. I think there's about 4 or 5 on there, but for what it is, and it's free as well, go and grab it. Now, the problem with these is in the past they've had their site taken down a few times, mainly down to copyright stuff in the past, but as long as you just go online and search Sensible Software, the complete Amiga works, you'll be able to track it down. Someone's always stashed it somewhere or made it available as a download, so yeah, well worth tracking down. Now, another bit of news I noticed over on the Amigans.net. Basically, a guy called Amiga Blitter, this really impressed me. He's working on a copy of DOSBox. Now, that's the PC equivalent, and basically it's a full emulation program for computer. I also had a version on the Mac several years ago. It's been going for years. It's a fantastic bit of kit, and it basically plays anything DOS related, pretty much all Windows 32 stuff. But the fact that this guy's been able to get it working quite well, I think it's on a stock Amiga. It might be an 8 meg expanded one, an accelerator card there, but a pretty low spec machine for an A1200, and he's managed to get loads of the, I think he's put down here, VGA mode games. He's been having massive problems, he put, with the CGA EGA mode. And he also put that DOS protected mode is slow and buggy. Now he's only been working on this for about 3 or 4 weeks, from about the middle of February. But again, I'll put the link to that forum in the show notes. It'd be worth keeping an eye on that. I mean, if you just think of some of the DOS games you could get, like I was going to say some of the King's Quest titles, but those are already been released on the Amiga. But they're actually, I think the PC DOS games in most cases tend to be a lot better, especially as it got later on in the PC's life and stuff. They surpassed what was available on the Amiga. But if that program is capable of running VGA mode. I mean, some of the games you could get on there, you know, sequels of some of the, you know, Gabriel Knight games. I'm doing all Sierra games, but God, I can't even name that many DOS games, but there's loads out there. There's probably about 2,000, 3,000 I've seen on emulators and stuff. So yeah, definitely worth keeping an eye on, and I'm really looking forward to that. It's time to move over to this week's game, and for this week I've gone and picked Nitro. Now this was something I'm very familiar with. I would play this to death around a mate's house back in the day. It was a really pretty good for the time from what I remember, being a racing game. And actually I'd just completely forgotten about this, if I'm honest, and it was just I was looking for the next game to cover and started thumbing through possible things to do, and I thought, well, maybe I should tackle a proper racing game, because we did Indie Heat and I started looking at like the top down races, and I was wondering about Micro Machines and stuff, and then Nitro just came into me view, so I thought we'd settle on that one for this week. It was published by Psygnosis. This might actually be turned into the Psygnosis podcast, because we've covered a fair few of their games. Is that a bad thing or a good thing? I don't know, I'm not sure. It was developed by one of their in-house companies, sub-companies, I'm not sure, called Sizzlers. I couldn't find any info about them. It came out in 1990, so God, I must have got this like 3 or 4 years after that to play. $24.99 when it came out. It was only on one disc, and the reason I was so obsessed with it would have up to 3 players. Now, coding-wise, it was done by, I'm going to pronounce this wrong, it's Chris Spielberg, not Spielberg, Berg, Jamie Woodhouse. Now, he was also the chap who was responsible for the main design of it, I think, and the idea, because I found a couple of interviews dotted around from this guy, and the main push for the game was from him. Another chap called Phil Betts. Now, across the 3 of them, looking at the list of games they brought out, there was a massive list. I'd be here for hours reading these out, but one of the big ones I saw was ATR, Quack. Jamie Woodhouse was the main chap behind these, and Revenge of the Mutant Camels 2. I think that's a fairly famous shooter. I'm not entirely sure, actually. Is that... Yeah, I don't know. Anyway, music by Tony Williams. This guy had a really interesting past. I mean, he was involved with Beneath a Steel Sky, which has got some great music, especially for the time. Shinobi, that's a big Sega game. Viz, I believe that's a very, very bad game. Judge Dredd, lots and lots of titles. He seemed to like jump into lots and lots of like licensed games, things for like Sega and a lot of the big companies and stuff. But and again, like Beneath the Steel Sky, thumbs up to him. That's got some fantastic music. The graphics were done by Jamie Woodhouse. This guy was in pretty much every part of the game, I think, except for the music. Jim Ray Bowers and Neil Thompson, and between them all they'd done graphics for games like The Killing Game Show. I think that was a request by DK to be covered at some point. I might be getting the wrong game there, but yeah. Carthage, I think that's a strategy game. Strix, that's a very odd title. STRYX, I have no idea what that is. And then Red Zone, I think that's like a land-based shooter, or it might be an airplane flight game. I don't know. I should have looked at those titles a little bit closer. Now, one of the interesting things about this game, the main title screen and the box art pretty much were taken from a fighting fantasy book, which is one of my favourite things to collect. I've got a big chunk of those. I'm going to mention that in the Hero Quest episode. But this one, the cover comes off the book called Freedom Fighter, which I believe is the 13th book in the series, and that came out in 1985. Now, they use some sort of ray tracing with the art on this, so I did have a look at what that actually was. I found reference to it, but what it actually involved. I think it's like you either scan something or you draw a device over like a pen and then it scans it into the machine. I'm not sure. You guys might have more luck with that. I did see that in an interview with Jamie Woodhouse. Originally, the game was based on like Super Sprint and Hot Rod, you know, that sort of a top-down, maybe like single-screen game in a way. But this later went on to inspire ATR, which is all-terrain racing by Team 17, which I think is a very, very famous racing game, especially for its type. And you'll see as we go through it, but there's a lot of stuff about Nitro. It's a good few years before ATR, and a lot of the stuff seems to have been carried over. And like this is like the prototype in a way, and maybe that shows. But you know, it is a good game for it. There's no complaints on that part there. Now, there is a story for this in the manual, but weirdly, it's more a tale of part of a race and a racing robot going out there and trying to win like a £1 million prize, and it doesn't really go into detail. And when you look at like the title screen and the in-game graphics that flick up, it's all very futuristic, maybe like a World War III style apocalypse place where everything's just gone to hell. But there's no mention of that in the story, and it does make me wonder that maybe the guys were going to come up with something a bit better later on, but maybe they just didn't bother in the end. So, I mean, the game itself is a top-down race, and I'm talking in the sense of like micro machines, that sort of a thing. It's all scrolling beautifully. It's not like a single screen, again, like what Indie Heat was. There's 32 levels. I don't know if you can call them. Maybe it's races would be a better term for it. But these are spread across different places like a city environment, you know, roads, cones, that sort of thing. Forest environment, like dirt track roads and lots of trees. Desert, I think there's things like ruins across all of them there. And then an apocalypse landscape, which is probably the oddest part for a map to race around, but it's represented quite well. You can get a game over in this. I mean, basically you've got to, you race between 4 people. You've got to be first. But the game will end if you run out of fuel, and the whole push behind the game is really to survive each race, get as many points as possible, and keep earning fuel as you go along. The thing is, if you don't, let's say it's game over straight away. Now, you do get a choice of 3 cars to race with. There's a Formula 1 style racing car that's got it's like high fuel consumption, so it's not great for lots and lots and lots of racing because you'll just burn through your fuel supply. But it's extremely good on like racing in, say, like the city levels. There's a sports car that does quite well on, but what I found it, to me, it felt a bit like the medium, the average car, because it was done fairly well on street and off road and stuff like that. It's like a very much round an all-round racer. There's a buggy, which is like a turbo buggy, I believe, because I think it's got like rockets on the back now. That's great for like the desert and the apocalypse levels, because I mean it's really, really quick. The fuel consumption's not too great, but the speed behind it means it's a real benefit. Now, there is a limit to this as well, that you can only use each type of car 3 times on, say, a specific level. It's sort of like lives in a way. I'm not entirely sure how you describe it, but I mean, it does mean that you've got to be careful and think what you choose and consider the race ahead. I mean, this is one you're going to be replaying a fair few times just because you need that benefit to learn the tracks. Now, one of the great things that I did notice was as well as the car selection, you get to choose a character what you race with. Now, this doesn't affect anything in the game whatsoever. It's just it's like when you put your 3 letters in initial sort of thing for your name. But the great thing is they've and this just shows you what it was like in the early 90s, because there was no sort of like legal repercussion or anything like that. But they've got like James Bond in there, Clint Eastwood, Sylvester Stallone as Rambo, and these are actual movie characters. I mean, James Bond, for God's sake, and this is Roger Moore's James Bond. But the thing is, they've got big chunks of the face missing, and they look almost like the Terminator in a way. And probably Clint Eastwood is the one who most looks like Arnie, you know, with all half the face missing and the big red eyes and stuff. It's really, really, really dodgy, and especially as games develop later on, and licenses and likeness of characters will cost an absolute fortune. I think you get to like the mid 90s when they were doing things like maybe a bit later, like Spider-Man type games, and using big actors suckers, and there was nothing like that. They just wouldn't get away with it. So it was quite funny. Now, one thing with me, the graphics are quite well done. Everything's really well drawn and defined, but a lot of it did remind me of like Micro Machines in a way. It's like the cars look more like little race cars that you control with a remote rather than, you know, an actual big proper car. I mean, that's probably not a downside really. I mean, because the graphics are actually fairly nice. The levels themselves, I say there's 32 of them, but they're actually quite big. There's a lot of driving to be done around them, and there's a fair few bits like dead ends and tricks with like cones and things. So there's this odd element of you don't really need to do it, but you can explore the levels to some degree quickly as you're moving around. The sound effects on the cars, typical like engine noises, skids, and then sliding and scrapes, and it sounds as good as it should be for a driving game. They're not too loud, but they're just about right. The introduction for the game, this is what really blew me away watching it, is just from like when you load the disc up, you have like a 3D view of a futurist. It's like the sports car. And the lights flick on, and it's like in the dark in a garage. Lights come on, and you see the indicator, the lights pop up there. And then weirdly, the graphics of the system, they like spin round the car, and it must be a trick in a way, because it's not proper 3D. It can't be. But it springs around to the side of the car, and then the car shoots off at an angle and goes out of the garage door, which is open. And it's awesome. And this is like, it must be like your typical Psygnosis thing, because they were really driving stuff, you know, going real with this presentation stuff at the time. It just looked absolutely fantastic. You know, I mean, again, this is 1990 at the end of the day. You shouldn't be getting amazing stuff like this. It reminded me a bit of like Road Avenger, I think, on the Mega CD, and that's like 5 or 6 years away in future. So they really went to town with the graphics on that part. I'm just trying to think now. That's just thrown me off. Like in between each stage, you can go to a shop, so you can like upgrade things. I mean, there's nothing too amazing there. You like nitro, gas, tires, improved engine, and which just do things like make your car faster, make your grip to the road better, take corners easier, that sort of stuff. Your typical driving stuff. Despite how I described it before, the game isn't a free-for-all. You can't run off and go and explore everything like 100%. It has this odd system. I mean, what it seems like an odd system, but it's like as the screen is scrolling, all the players have to stay together, and then the person at the back, if they get too far behind, will be pulled forward. And if you go too far in front, let's say, you know, you're really racing incredibly, and you manage to catch up with the screen, it does penalise you a bit and bring you back. So it keeps you, again, it's a bit like Magstrom, it keeps you just floated around in the middle and keeps everybody together in a small group, and it works really well. Now, another thing for the graphics as well, which really impressed me. When you're driving around, there's some levels are done at night, and in front of the car you've got like so the level's dark. You've got like a round circle of light in front of you, and it just moves perfectly with the car. As you turn, it turns, and so on. And it's a really stark and great effect. Add to that, you've got like cat's eyes on the road, and it makes these levels really difficult but interesting to drive through at the same time, because you really have to keep on your toes and then keep an eye on the action as well at the same time. And it just has this adds this whole other element to the game. It just really impressed me. Now, the main push of the game is that, you know, you're racing for points. It doesn't matter if you come in last, but every time you finish a race, if you keep getting the minimum number of points, you're not going to have enough gas to keep you going through each and every race. Now, dotted throughout each level, you can collect extra things like more gas and money to make improvements at the garage and stuff. There's things like rolling barrels or it looks very odd, but like engine parts come flying down the screen at you. And if you're quick enough, because they do shoot across the screen at a fair bit of pace, you can collection and get some improvements there. But the gas is a very odd one. Like I say, you want to be first because you want to get the points, because the one with the most points also, you know, gets more gas, and it'll make the game last longer. But at the same time, it gives that element you don't want to be doing too crazy things because you want to collect as much stuff as possible. I'm probably not describing it very well, but it just seems very well balanced. This mix of speed and like a collectathon in there, and it's explorated like racer. Now, one of the funny things about it straight away is throughout certain levels, you see lots and lots of pedestrians dotted around, and you can actually run them over. Now, in a lot of the racetracks, you'll get penalised for that, but oddly, in some of the later ones, like the apocalyptic settings, maybe it's a bit like Mad Max and they're all villains, but you get like points when you run them over, but it does actually tell you before you start the actual thing. When you're racing as well, it sounds all great. Well, you can just run into anything. You can't. There's a bit of knockback. If you hit anything, it does slow your car down, and then the other cars will just shoot past you. So you have got to drive carefully. But the thing is, at least as you're improving the vehicle, you can feel it within the vehicle itself. It does feel, it drives better, it's smoother to turn, it's faster, it's quicker. The controls are very responsive. I always felt like I could turn on a dime with this sort of thing. You know, the car sort of like spins in a circle perfectly as throwing it around. There is a difference between the three vehicles when you're driving. Like, say, the Formula 1 vehicle is very, very quick, but I didn't feel that one was, say, as good at turning as like the buggy, again, which is meant for more off-road, but it works very well with the way it's controlled. Now, as you can probably tell already, I did have a fair bit of fun with this game. It was tough to pick out problems with it, but, you know, like all things, it did have its issues. One of the oddest things about it, and which was so weird, because it's a Psygnosis game, and they usually go to town with stuff like this, but the music was just, it was way too limited. I think there was just 2 tunes throughout the entire game. You get something different on the title screen, and like so it's dragged over to like the menu and the garage select screen. That was about it. And then you've got the main race music. I mean, I played this pretty much through to completion, but it's the same music throughout, and it's a good tune, don't get me wrong, but when you're playing for, you can probably complete the whole thing on a single run through in about 50 minutes, maybe an hour, something like that. But that single race music never changes. It doesn't matter what level type it is, it's always the same, unless I'm just missing something. But, you know, it's a nice tune at least, but again, after a while it just gets very repetitive. Another problem I had with it, when you're driving through a lot of the tracks, there's cones which are just put in the way, and they do things like there'll be a circle of cones surrounding like an item on the floor, which is all very well and good, but the problem is when you hit the cone, it just completely zaps any. They're more like lampposts than cones. They do knock out of the way, but they just take a far too much speed off you. And one thing I would have liked to have been able to do is like to skid round a corner, and maybe I just drive like a maniac and just hit like some cones on the side as I slide, you know, and just take them out. That would have been fun, but you can't do it in this because the car just almost comes to a stop, and it's too reductive. I mean, this was the other odd thing about it as well. There was loads to collect, like all these engine bits and bobs and money dotted around and extra points and things like that. But there's no weapons, which is just like a very, very odd thing. You're just constantly racing, which is fine, but it really, really does feel like it needed that as an extra bonus for something to do, because this is a lot of like, it's, even though it's not a combat game and it's a racing game, it adds something to say like Micro Machines and that type of game where you've got the extra element of combat, and it just seems odd that it wasn't included. Another thing, because I was trying the ADF on an emulator just to get some gameplay footage, and my god, it loads and it loads and it loads between each and every level. I mean, I know it's loading each level separately, but it just seemed to take forever, and if it wasn't for the fact that I could jump up the floppy disk speed to turbo on the emulator, I'd have probably given up out of frustration on a real bit of hardware. I mean, I haven't actually got a real floppy disk drive on my Amiga 1200, I've got a Gotek in there, it's probably the closest. I should have maybe tried that, but it just runs, if you're playing this and you can, try and do it on like the WHD load version, because I think it's a fair bit quicker from what I tried of it. Another thing I did wasn't really an annoyance, and it's not a problem with the game as such, but I didn't feel that it was zoomed out enough. It was nice and close, and it's top down view and you can see all the scenery, but there's a lot of races where you're dotting around and you've got big straights and then turns and things, and then you might have like a chicanery and it's all zooming in and out like a snake on the track, and you just think it would be nice to have seen a bit more of the track if the camera was just a bit higher. I mean, it can't be limitations of the game, because I mean, like ATR much later had the speed that provides, the view that provides is just about perfect, and this really needed just tweaking a bit more on that just to make it that extra little bit special. Now, the magazines at the time ranged this quite differently. Amiga Format gave it 84%, CU Amiga 82%, Amiga Action 78%, you can see it dropping off there, and Zap gave it 64%. And I will have to say, it's very, very odd. I mean, it's not a 90% by far, but it may be about an 85 or an 80. It just seemed very odd that it would be like reduced scores as it was going along. But even reading the reviews, they were none too impressed with it, and most of them said it was a fun game, but it just needed a lot more tweaking and improvements in place. It's probably some of the complaints I'm making, but I'm not a professional reviewer, what can I say? One of the most impressive things I felt about the whole thing is the way the scrolling works. Like I've said before, it was similar to Micro Machines, but it was a lot sharper than that, and it was a lot more responsive, and I was really, really impressed with just how fast it was. Again, this is 1990, so it was really, really a quick game. The whole thing, it's for a racing game, it was very fresh, it was fun, it was very, very fast. I had lots and lots of fun with it. One issue I did find with it though is it was quite repetitive if you were playing it over a long period. Now, I said, I managed to complete it. It probably took me about 50 minutes to an hour. But by the end of it, I was just like getting a bit tired, and it wasn't as amazing as it should be. But I did find that over the last week, I have gone back to it a few times, and I've probably played it for like 10 or 15 minutes. And this is only in the single player. But it's fun in short bursts like that. It's quite addictive as well, and I think it is going to be one of these games I'm just going to keep to one side. And back in the day, I'd probably stuck this on a single disc and had it in me 10 pack of special floppies. Now, the biggest issue with it on the whole was the lack of like any weapons or firepower, because the thing is, this is a very action oriented racing game. You want to be barging other players off the road and getting in clashes and stuff, but you need a way to fight back. I mean, again, they haven't got weapons either, but it feels like it's missing that, and it's I don't know what they were thinking when they designed it. They must have surely thought to themselves, well, we're going to be creating this great multiplayer game, let's not put, why don't we just won't bother with weapons, it's silly, we're not going to do it. But it would have added so much more to it. I mean, the whole thing is it's a multiplayer game, really. You can tell that, you can have up to 3 players, so that's 1 on the keyboard, 2 on the other joysticks, I think, or possibly 2 on the I can never remember. But as a multiplayer game, it seems absolutely fantastic, because it's all based around everyone being in a smallish group and not going too far ahead, and you're really scrabbling to get around. But that it would have made it something like Mario Kart, or it would just add the extra added element of combat just to make it better. But yeah, I mean, overall, I really enjoyed it. It was a good enough game. I'm going to keep going back to it, I think, because I had a lot of fun with it, and I like the bit of humour thrown in there with the characters and things and the action from the game and the racing. It's definitely worth either tracking down or just playing it on an emulator or something like that, because, I mean, for a one-disc game, it's a lot of fun. At that point, I think it's the perfect time to finish the show. As always, thanks for listening. If you want to send me an email or get in touch, come up with some suggestions, or even comment on what you've just heard, then by all means, drop me a line on the @AMIGArama pod Twitter account, or just come to AMIGArama.com and go through the contact bit there. Anyway, there's loads and loads to see and do on that website, so by all means, pop along. I'd appreciate it. Until next time, guys.